Back to you. You also touched upon the differences of opinion that we might have had with the United States when it comes to the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Of course, there's a convergence there in terms of us wanting the war to end. But clearly, we have to, of course, rely on Russia to supply us large quantities of oil, something that is very much in our own national interest as far as our energy security is concerned. But do you see that as a sticky point between Prime Minister Modi and President Biden in how this relationship might evolve in the near future?
In a sense, US and India operate in exactly the same way. It is concerned with its self-interest first and foremost. And it's surprising that the US isn't honest about admitting to that. Because India is, Mr. Jaishankar has consistently said that, look, I'm not, I have, so many mouths to feed. I'm not going to go and buy the costliest oil just because you guys have a position on the Russia war. As a country, India doesn't. So again, US's decisions are also based on strategic self-interest. And there's a commonality there. But what the US also does is it tries to act as this caretaker and father of the world, in a sense, and which is why, they often sermonize, they often go into these, lectures that they give the whole world, including India. But I think kudos to Mr. Modi and his government for not buckling down to this enormous public pressure that was put on it to condemn Russia, to break ties with Russia. And just recently, you might have seen on, there's an article about how Indian government's purchase of Russian oil effectively helped stabilize the oil prices in the global market. So in a sense, the EU and the US have to thank India, and by India, I mean the Modi government, for its decision on Russian oil, because of which, the oil prices haven't significantly skyrocketed in a way that's unaffordable for most people. So again, every country has to think about its self-interest. I mean, Mr. Modi is a prime minister of, he may be revered all around the world, and he is revered all around the world, but ultimately he is a prime minister of who? He's the prime minister of 140 crore Indians. So he has to think of the interest and the larger good of 140 crore Indians. And if it allies and merges with interest of the whole world at large, so be it. But where it does not, the choice is clear.
Mr. Tanna, speaking about trade, since that's an issue that you brought up in your first response, there was a trade deal that did not go through. Donald Trump, at the time that he was president of the United States, did express certain apprehensions about high Indian tariffs, almost like it was a complaint on his part. And then, of course, we've tried to bring about some kind of a resolution with respect to terms of trade with the United States that is also acceptable to us. However, there have been some glitches. For example, the generalized system of preference program, which has been revoked for India on the part of the Americans. So do you see some kind of a light at the end of the tunnel in terms of a favorable trade deal that we might strike with the United States?
Sorry, the audio wasn't as clear. I couldn't hear you. But what I understood you asking me is whether the issues or the friction that happened when President Trump was in power with India, whether you see them being ironed out now under President Biden.
Especially on issues of trade, yes.
Yes, I think so. I think so because President Trump had this very hard taskmaster approach. He's the art of the deal author, right? So his strategy always is to push the other person into a corner and then try to negotiate, something that he can take home with and he can brag about. But I think the U.S. under President Biden is a little more measured. And I'm not saying it's President Biden who takes the decisions, but, the people in his administration take the decisions. And they realize, as your anchor person just said, right now, that the U.S. economy is in a very vulnerable state. I mean, it is still the largest economy in the world, no doubt. But there are many chinks in their armor. And the reason why they're courting India to this extent is because they realize that in order to prevent these holes in the boat, so-called, to prevent the ship from sailing because of these holes in the so-called boat called the U.S. economy, they need India to fill as many holes as possible. And therefore, I do see some rationality infusing back into these trade talks and other vital matters between U.S. and India, which earlier were a source of friction. Again, because of posturing. A lot of what President Trump was up to was, posturing. And we know that, it's more than proven now. So hopefully this outreach with President Biden and, especially the personal touch that they are trying to give him, and also the opportunity they're giving him to address the joint session of the U.S. Congress. I think all of that taken together serves as an indication that the U.S. is serious about entering into good faith negotiations with India rather than, being a bully and enforcing its writ first and then kind of trying to, gain a victory out of it, for PR purposes.
Let's also talk about China, Mr. Tanna, because if you talk about the bilateral trade between China and the United States, it's upwards of $600 billion US, which is several times that of the bilateral trade between India and the United States. Many believe that India and the US have not really lived up to their potential as far as bilateral trade is concerned. Do you honestly believe that the United States sees India as a possible substitute to China in that regard? Can we emerge as some kind of a manufacturing force that China has been for all this while, and perhaps even supplant China in the future? Does the United States really look to India as that kind of an alternative?
Well, I don't think so, at least not right now. And the reason for that is because, China has had a head start. China and U.S. relationships started decades ago, whereas India was still, under this socialist economy mindset, where profit is bad. We weren't encouraging companies. Our liberalization only happened in the early 90s. And, it took several years as gestation period, for our companies to actually start competing in the market. Having said that, what we have achieved in terms of many major companies trying to, shift the components of their business, components of their production. For example, Apple in India, examples like that, even car companies in India. Those small components that are slowly being shifted, and it especially happened after COVID, where the U.S. is beginning to show a little bit of distrust towards China. And that's apparent from many statements that President Biden has made and members of his administration have made. It is a golden opportunity for India to prove that it has consistent laws and regulations enforced in a consistent way, without any, knee-jerk reactions, without any, discriminatory approach of any kind. Let's make this a rule-based industrial law and order system, and let's basically take advantage of the overall increasing distrust that not just the U.S., but also European Union is beginning to have towards China. So it's not yet a replacement. Can it be a replacement at some point of time in the future? Absolutely, yes. But for that, India has the onus to play, and India has to convince the U.S., which is why I believe Mr. Modi is one of the items on his agenda in his meetings with the CEOs is essentially that I promise you, because I am in power, I'm the prime minister, I have, my party has a majority, so we have a stable government. I promise you a fair, rules-based, robust system. Come to India and put your money, and I want you to put your money where your mouth is, and I am going to guarantee a stable investment climate for your investment.